Her daughter-in-law rehomed her dog while she was under anesthesia. Her son called it a kindness. Margaret came home to an empty leash and a cold dinner. She said nothing, just walked to the safe, pulled out the deed, and made new rules. "You took what I loved without asking," she said. "Now I'm taking back everything you assumed." And before the week was over, they were packing boxes they never paid to unpack. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. He always barked when I came home. This time, nothing. The key turned slower than it should have. Margaret's hand was still stiff from the IV lines, her knuckles swollen from days of inactivity. She braced her cane against the porch rail, breathed deep, and pushed open the door. No bark, no scratching paws, no tail thumping against the hardwood, no flash of tawny fur rounding the corner like he always did. Ears perked, head tilted, ready to welcome her back with something close to joy. Just silence. Margaret stood in the doorway a moment longer, her free hand tightening around the strap of her hospital bag. The air in the house smelled like lemon cleaner and something unfamiliar, fabric softener maybe, or a candle she didn't buy. Still no bark. She stepped forward, slowly, carefully, and shut the door behind her. Her eyes moved toward the base of the stairs, Scout's usual post. Empty. She scanned the living room. No dog bed, no half-chewed rope toy in the corner, no silver bowl near the kitchen entrance. Her breath caught, almost involuntarily. Then came footsteps. Quick, sharp, deliberate. Amanda. "Hi," her daughter-in-law said flatly. "Welcome back." Margaret forced a smile. "Thank you. I didn't expect—" "Chris is at work. I left some soup in the fridge." Margaret nodded. Her throat was dry. "And Scout?" Amanda didn't blink. "Oh, right." A pause, like she'd almost forgotten to mention it. "We rehomed him." Margaret blinked. "I'm sorry?" "He went to a better home. Quieter. No stairs. Big yard." Margaret's grip on her cane slipped slightly. She steadied herself. "Without telling me?" Amanda sighed and crossed her arms. "You were sedated. Post-op pain meds, remember? It didn't seem fair to bother you with decisions you couldn't think straight about. Besides, he was old. It wasn't safe for him or for you." "Where is he now?" Amanda shrugged. It was one of those shelters with a senior match program. They place older dogs with older couples. It's a good fit. "A shelter. Not a kill shelter," Amanda said quickly, as if that would soften the blow. "They were really nice." Margaret stared at the space where Scout's bed used to be. Her vision blurred, not from tears but from pressure rising behind her temples. 10 days. That's all she'd been gone. 10 days of painkillers and plastic mattresses and tray dinners, and now, silence. "Why didn't you wait?" she asked, quieter this time. Amanda walked past her, heading toward the kitchen. "Because it needed to be done. You weren't in a position to make that call, Margaret. That call wasn't yours." Amanda stopped in the doorway. "Look, I know he meant a lot to you, but honestly, you needed less to worry about. You should be thanking me." Margaret didn't speak. She couldn't, not yet. Amanda continued on, her voice lighter now, as if the conversation had reached its logical end. "There's chamomile in the cabinet, and if you're up for it, we can watch something later." Margaret stared at the place on the rug, where Scout always curled up after dinner, his chin resting on his front paws. She didn't nod, didn't move, just whispered, "Without telling me?" Amanda didn't answer. She'd already disappeared down the hallway, humming something tuneless. Margaret tightened her grip on the cane, walked into the living room, and lowered herself into her chair. A dull ache throbbed through her leg, but she ignored it. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a framed photo, her and Scout and Chris. The frame was dusty. The glass was gone. His bowl was gone. So was the picture frame from my nightstand. It wasn't just that Scout was gone. It was that he'd been erased. Margaret's feet made soft, uneven taps as she moved through the house, one hand grazing the wall for balance. The stillness felt heavy, like the air had thickened in her absence. A home should carry the residue of life, fur in corners, water rings on hardwood, toys tucked beneath chairs. But everything felt curated. She stepped into the kitchen, Scout's bowl, stainless steel, slightly dented from years of nudges, was gone. The mat beneath it, embroidered with the word "Good Boy," was missing too. In its place was a pristine navy runner that didn't match anything Margaret owned. She opened the pantry. No dog food. The half-empty bag of treats she used to keep near the sugar jar? Gone. She turned to the fridge and opened it out of instinct. The chicken broth ice cubes she made for Scout during the summer. Mere heat. Melted memory. The bottom shelf now held Amanda's pressed green juices and a labeled mason jar that read, "Overnight oats. Chia only." Margaret shut the door with quiet finality. She moved down the hall toward her bedroom. Her room still smelled faintly of her rosewater linen spray, but the comforter had been retucked and the nightstand reorganized. Margaret's breath caught when she realized what was missing. The photo frame. Scout, 5 years old, caught mid-lick in the middle of a sunbeam. She'd kept it on her nightstand since the week her husband passed. It had become the last thing she saw before bed, a reminder that even grief could learn to rest. It was gone. In its place, a scented candle and Amanda's hardback copy of Atomic Habits. Margaret's knees ached as she lowered herself onto the edge of the bed. She scanned the floor. The dog blanket, usually crumpled near the dresser, the one Scout dragged from room to room, wasn't there either. Not folded, not washed, vanished. A soft sound came from the hallway, Amanda's voice, distant and unconcerned, on the phone. Margaret heard her laugh, then say, "Well, we thought it was time. He was just extra energy, you know?" Margaret clenched her jaw, her fingers pressed into the comforter's edge as she stood, this time moving with sharper purpose. She shuffled toward the laundry room, one of Scout's favorite hiding spots when storms rolled in. Nothing. She opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Empty. Even the lint roller with dog hair clinging to it had been thrown out. It was all too clean. She stepped toward the trash can, hesitated, then lifted the lid. Crumpled paper. An empty salad container. And beneath that, a torn piece of a printed form. She reached in, flattened it. Pet Surrender Acknowledgement Form. Name of surrendering party, Amanda Carver Wilson. Dog's name, Scout reason. Owner no longer able to care due to health decline in household. Margaret read the words again. Owner no longer able to care. Her mouth went dry. She dug further, pulling out more pieces. Edges ripped unevenly, ink smudged. But the handwriting on the back of one page was unmistakable. Amanda's tight, looping cursive. The same handwriting she used for grocery lists and sticky notes. This wasn't a moment of miscommunication. It was a decision. Plotted, printed, and buried. She pressed the pieces into her lap, her fingers trembling now, not from pain but from clarity. It wasn't just that Scout had been taken. He had been processed. Margaret smoothed the paper across her knee, scanning the shelter's contact details at the top. A phone number was still intact. She whispered it once, then reached for her landline. She said, "You were sedated." I said, "I wasn't dead." The roast chicken was dry, overseasoned, underloved. Amanda carved it like a woman proving a point, not feeding a family. Margaret sat at the end of the table, upright, her plate mostly untouched. The chair where Scout used to curl up was noticeably empty. The absence felt louder than the clink of silverware. Chris cleared his throat. "How was your first day back, Mom?" She lifted her glass of water slowly. Quiet. Amanda didn't look up. That was kind of the point. Margaret set her glass down. Chris tried again. "You look stronger already. Those 10 days really helped." "Recovery is a quiet process," Amanda added, as if it were part of a campaign slogan. "Less movement, less noise, less chaos. That's what the doctor said, right?" Margaret watched a piece of carrot roll to the edge of her plate. Scout wasn't chaos. Amanda finally met her eyes. He was a 90-pound senior dog with arthritis and separation anxiety. "He was mine." "You were sedated," Amanda said plainly. "You don't remember how you were the first few days. You couldn't sit up without help. What were we supposed to do? Just let him bark and pace and knock things over while you were struggling to breathe?" "I wasn't dead," Margaret said, her voice so calm it cut through the table like a wire. "You didn't even wait." Chris shifted in his seat, eyes darting between them. Amanda was trying to help, Mom. We were worried, and it's not like you don't still have us. Margaret's fork paused in midair. You don't think I notice how this house has changed? The furniture rearranged, the kitchen reorganized, my bedroom redecorated while I was gone. You needed help, Amanda said again, more softly this time. No, Margaret said. You needed control. The words hung in the air longer than expected. Chris rubbed the back of his neck. Amanda stood up and began collecting plates. I'm sorry you feel blindsided, Amanda said, her back to Margaret. But sometimes choices have to be made. You're not well. You needed rest, not responsibility. It wasn't personal. We thought it was best. Margaret looked at her son. And you agreed? Chris hesitated. I didn't know the details until after it was done, but it did seem like a good idea. Less for you to worry about. I've managed this house for 35 years, she said, pushing back her chair. I handled a full-time job, a dying husband, and raising you while keeping this roof from caving in. Scout never once made that harder. Amanda turned, arms crossed. You're making this into a war. It was just a dog. Margaret tilted her head slowly, like someone studying a map for the last time before redrawing the borders. He wasn't just anything. She stood, her knees aching but steady. Would you like dessert? Amanda asked, as if that might fix the air between them. Margaret didn't answer. She moved past the table, past the hallway portraits, past the place where Scout once kept guard during storms. She entered her room and closed the door. Then she crossed to the tall wardrobe at the back wall. She opened the doors, revealing a false back panel, and pushed it inward. Behind it, an old fireproof safe, heavy, dull gray, silent. She knelt slowly, the floor cold through her socks. Her fingers found the combination dial like an old habit, 38, 14, 22. The lock clicked open. Inside, a worn manila envelope, sealed in red tape, marked in her late husband's handwriting. Deed, 116 Cypress Lane owner, Margaret Louise Bennett Wilson. She pulled the envelope out, brushed off the dust, and whispered, Let's see who makes the decisions now. He slept beside me for 11 years. She gave him away in 2 days. Scout came into Margaret's life at a time when the silence of grief had become unbearable. She still remembered the day clearly. 11 years ago, 3 weeks after the funeral, she had gone to the shelter for no reason other than to be somewhere that didn't smell like flowers wilting in vases or casseroles dropped off by whispering neighbors. He'd been in the last kennel on the right, a gangly mutt with sad eyes and mismatched ears. Not a bark or a whine, just a slow, patient gaze as if he understood her before she ever spoke. She hadn't intended to adopt that day, but when she reached through the bars and he nudged his head into her palm, she said softly, Well, that's that, isn't it? Now she sat cross-legged on the floor of her bedroom, an old photo album spread across her lap. The pages had gone soft at the corners, some stuck together with age, others nearly worn thin by fingertips. She turned each page slowly, like a priest thumbing through confession. There was Scout curled on the rug in front of the fireplace the first winter. Scout wearing a crooked birthday hat when he turned 5. Scout perched on the porch, watching Chris mow the lawn like it was his life's mission to supervise. He'd been there for everything, holidays, surgeries, empty Christmas mornings. When she retired from the library, he greeted her at the door as if he knew how hard it had been to leave behind the only other place that gave her purpose. She flipped another page. Her favorite photo, Scout curled at the foot of the bed, one paw flopped over her slipper, his eyes closed in total trust. Amanda had erased that. 2 days. That's all it took. 11 years of loyalty, and Amanda had handed him off like an inconvenience. Margaret's jaw tightened. She turned the last page of the album and saw an old receipt tucked into the sleeve, a faded printout from the vet's office. Her eyes scanned the faded ink. Name, Scout Diob, estimated. 2012 microchip ID, 008-3 64-118-722. She stared at the number. Her fingers went to her phone. She opened her email, typed microchip registration into the search bar, and sure enough, there it was. A digital registration confirmation from nearly a decade ago, back when things still felt anchored. The confirmation email included a login. She clicked the link. The password field blinked. She typed in her old library password, Dewey 1913. It worked. Scout's profile appeared. A headshot from his third year, tongue out, ears slightly flopped. Margaret exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a week. Then her eyes dropped to the fields below. Owner, Margaret Louise Bennett Wilson. Alternate contact, none listed status. Active, no transfer initiated. He was still listed as hers, still hers. Amanda hadn't transferred the microchip. She'd surrendered him to a shelter, but legally, Scout was still registered in Margaret's name. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not joy, not yet, but a shift, like possibility. From the hallway, she heard Amanda's voice again, laughing on a call, careless and bright. Margaret closed the album, but kept the microchip number open on her phone. She copied it, then opened a new note titled SCOUTLEGALTRAIL. She stared at the microchip number again, then clicked Update Contact Info. She entered a new phone number, then she clicked Add Co-Owner, and typed her own name, again. She forgot. He was legally mine. So is this house. The hold music was cheerful. Too cheerful. Flutes, light drums, something trying to pretend everything was fine. Margaret pressed the phone tighter to ear, listening as the automated voice looped again. Thank you for your patience. A representative will be with you shortly. She sat at the dining table, her back straight, Scout's microchip number scrawled on a notepad in front of her, along with the shelter's name pulled from the shredded form in the trash. Whisper Grove Senior Pet Haven. The irony stung. Whisper, Grove, Haven. The phone clicked and a warm, chipper voice came on. Hi there, thanks for holding. This is Tasha at Whisper Grove. How can I help you today? Margaret's voice was firm, controlled. Yes, I believe my pet was surrendered to your facility last week. His name is Scout. Microchip ID 008-364-118-722. Okay. Tasha paused as keys clicked on the other end. All right. Scout, yes, I do see that record. He's a large mixed-breed senior, right? Tan coat with a white snout? That's him? I'm seeing here he was surrendered by Amanda Carver Wilson. Is that you? Margaret's jaw tightened. Number Amanda is my daughter-in-law. Scout is microchipped in my name and was taken from my home while I was hospitalized without my consent. There was a pause. Tasha's voice softened. I'm very sorry to hear that. Is he still at the shelter? Actually, no. He was adopted just 3 days ago by a local couple. Empty nesters. Very kind people. Margaret's heart dropped, then steadied. Do you have their information? I can't release that without permission, I'm afraid, but if you'd like, I can give them your contact details and a message. They may choose to reach out. Margaret breathed in through her nose. Please do. Of course, and I'll note here that there's a potential dispute with the surrender. We take those seriously, especially with a microchip in someone else's name. Thank you, Margaret said. You've been helpful. She hung up the phone and sat still for a moment. The silence wasn't hollow this time. It was waiting. She picked up her pen again and began writing. To whom it may concern, my name is Margaret Wilson. I'm reaching out regarding a dog you recently adopted named Scout. He lived with me for over a decade and was surrendered without my knowledge while I was recovering from surgery. I want to be clear. I am not demanding his return, nor do I wish to upend his life if he's found peace in your home. I am grateful someone kind took him in. I only ask for the opportunity to explain, and if you are open to it, to visit him, or discuss what might be possible. He was my companion through the hardest seasons of my life, and even now, I want what's best for him. Warmly, Margaret L. Wilson, phone number and address included. She folded the letter with deliberate care, slipped it into a cream envelope, and pressed a forever stamp into the corner. Her handwriting was steady, decisive, the kind used by librarians, women who've written thousands of call numbers and obituaries alike. She walked it to the mailbox at the end of the drive, ignoring the ache in her hip. The wind picked up as she dropped the envelope in, rustling the leaves at her feet. Amanda's car wasn't in the driveway. Chris wouldn't be home until 6. Margaret stood for a moment longer, watching the red flag on the box tremble slightly in the breeze. This was no longer about Scout alone. It never had been. Amanda had treated Scout like furniture, something she could move out when it clashed with the decor. But Scout was Margaret's, by law, by bond, by memory. And so was the house Amanda took for granted every time she set down her keys like she owned the place. Margaret turned back toward the porch, climbed the steps, and paused at the front door. Her hand touched the brass doorknob she and her husband had installed themselves 30 years ago. The wood around it had faded in the shape of a palm. Property, Margaret thought, isn't just things you can sell. It's what you fight to keep. Back inside, she returned to the safe and opened it again. This time, she pulled out a second envelope, the original mortgage contract. She circled one line in red ink. Owner reserves full rights to revoke occupancy at any time. They said they'd stay 2 months. It's been 3 years. The spare bedroom wasn't spare anymore. Margaret stood in the doorway, staring at the once soft yellow walls now covered in taupe decals and mood boards Amanda had taped up with painter's tape. Her lace curtains were gone, replaced with blackout panels. The quilt she'd hand-stitched with her sister had vanished entirely. The room had been hollowed and rebuilt in someone else's image. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. Chris had been between jobs. Amanda was recovering from a miscarriage. 2 months max, they'd said, folding laundry on her couch as if they already lived there. That was 35 months ago. The closet door stood open, revealing racks of Amanda's boutique blouses and unopened shoeboxes. On the dresser sat a jewelry tree, a diffuser, and an envelope marked Vision Board, Year 3. Margaret. It felt her jaw tighten. The house had always been lived in, never pristine, but respected. Now it carried the scent of citrus cleaner and entitlement. She turned and walked down the hall, her steps measured. In the kitchen, she opened the drawer where she used to keep her checkbook, now filled with battery packs and a half-opened container of collagen powder. She checked the cabinet above the fridge where she kept important mail. Buried behind a stack of Chris's subscription envelopes was a single document Amanda had once asked to see, just out of curiosity, her 401k printout. That curiosity, Margaret realized now, hadn't been idle. She pulled her laptop from the drawer near the coffee pot and opened her banking app. Her retirement account, once managed jointly with Chris for convenience, still showed him as a co-signer. She hadn't noticed it before because she'd trusted him. That was her real mistake. She clicked Remove Secondary Access and was met with a security prompt. After confirming her ID, the system confirmed the change. User access level, primary. Solo. She exhaled, then opened a new browser tab and searched Open high-security personal savings account, private authorization only. Within 30 minutes, she'd opened a new account, transferred $87,000 out of the old one, and set a custom security question Chris would never guess. Security. Question: Where did Scout first sleep? Answer: Beside my feet. Her hand hovered over the mouse one last time before she clicked Confirm. The funds disappeared from the shared screen and reappeared on her own. That simple. Peace. Digitized. Outside, the sound of tires crunching gravel pulled her attention. The delivery truck pulled up and stopped short of the porch. Margaret watched from the window, arms folded, as the driver set 2 large boxes on the welcome mat and snapped a photo. By the time she opened the door, the truck had gone. Both packages bore Amanda's name. One read Organic Vitamin System, the other Wardrobe Refresh Spring Collection. Margaret bent slowly, picked one up, and immediately noticed the corner of the shipping label. Paid via Wilson Retirement Debit. Last 4, 8821. Her stomach sank. That was the old account, one Amanda should have had no access to. She carried the boxes inside, placed them on the dining table, and sat across from them like she was staring down a witness. Unopened. Unasked for. Unbelievable. She opened the account history to check the last few months. There it was, dozens of small withdrawals, boutique brands, skincare subscriptions, meal kits labeled Wellness Reset. Amanda had found her way in, and she'd been helping herself ever since. Margaret stood, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out an old roll of red painter's tape. She ripped a strip and slapped it across both boxes in one clean motion. In big, block letters, she wrote, "Not yours." Then she reached for her phone, opened a new note and titled it, "List of charges to reclaim. Begin here." She left soup on the counter, not kindness. The soup was lukewarm when Margaret found it. A plastic container sat on the kitchen counter, condensation still clinging to the inside of the lid. Next to it, a sticky note. "Made you lunch. Rest up. Amanda." The heart wasn't convincing. Neither was the soup. Margaret peeled back the lid. The steam was minimal. Chicken and rice, store-bought, thin, heavily salted. She dipped a spoon in, lifted it to her lips, and tasted preservatives. The flavor clung to the back of her throat like film. She dumped it in the sink. From the living room, she could hear Amanda's voice on a video call. Something about wellness hacks and gut resets. Margaret stared at the drain as the remnants of the soup spiraled down like something pretending to be care. This was Amanda's new routine. Perform kindness with the convenience of a microwave. Announce it loudly enough to avoid scrutiny. Make it look like affection. But it wasn't about nurturing, it was about narrative. The caretaker daughter-in-law, the supportive wife, the woman who held the house together while Margaret recovered. Except Margaret hadn't asked for meals. She hadn't asked for anyone to touch her fridge or her pantry. And every day Amanda still did, always saying, "Don't worry, I've got it." With a smile too polished to be casual. The pantry now contained shelf after shelf of almond flour, gluten-free pasta, and chia seeds. Margaret didn't eat any of it, never had. Amanda filled the house with food for her own lifestyle, then left Margaret a spoonful of obligation. Later that evening, when Amanda left for her yoga class, "You don't mind if I take an hour for myself, right?" Margaret walked to the kitchen drawer where receipts were usually tucked. She opened it. Jam-packed. She pulled them out in a bundle, unfolded each one carefully at the dining table like she was conducting an audit. The paper smelled of printer ink and coffee oils. Her reading glasses slid down. Her nose as she scanned item after item. Spirulina powder, $19.99. Bone broth concentrate, lemon ginger, $13.50. Bison jerky sampler pack, $24 detox smoothie kit, $45. Margaret blinked. She flipped to the next one. Not a single can of tuna, no oatmeal, not even basic tea. She turned to the receipts from last month. Same pattern. Amanda was shopping for herself, for her version of a household. Margaret reached for the yellow legal pad she kept on the corner of the table and began to write. Receipts, items I can't eat. Almond milk, unsweetened, vanilla. Cauliflower pizza crust, kombucha, passion fruit, eggplant jerky, fermented beet slaw. The pen pressed harder with each entry. Then she paused. On the most recent receipt, near the bottom, rotisserie chicken, garlic herb, for Scout. Date, 2 days after Margaret's surgery. She remembered that brand. Scout loved it. Margaret stared at the timestamp. Amanda had bought the chicken and surrendered Scout on the same day. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't about meals. It was about covering tracks. Amanda was feeding guilt in small, pre-portioned servings. Margaret stood, her joints stiff from sitting too long. She grabbed her phone, took photos of every receipt, and saved them in a new album titled Caretaker Audit. She tossed the paper copies in a bag and placed it under the sink with the cleaning supplies. Amanda wouldn't look there. Then, from the hallway, she heard the door open. Amanda breezed in with her gym bag and a glowing smile. "Did you try the soup?" Margaret looked at her, expression unreadable. "I did." Amanda's eyes lit up. "See? I told you warm food helps the body heal." Margaret nodded once. "So does honesty." Amanda paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" Margaret turned, slowly, deliberately. "It means you're good at heating things up, Amanda. But warmth and care are not the same." Amanda gave a short laugh. "You're reading too much into everything." "Am I?" Margaret asked, then walked past her. Later that night, Margaret added one more entry to her notes. Remove kitchen access from grocery card. Then she opened a separate note and titled it, Exit Plan. "I found the final charge. They didn't even pay it. It was buried in a stack of mail beneath a Pottery Barn catalog and a flyer for lawn services she didn't request. The envelope was thin, the kind with an address window, the kind that never brings good news. Margaret hadn't seen it until she went searching for her property tax receipt. She unfolded the pile slowly at the dining table, sorting through thick envelopes and hollow advertisements, until the logo caught her eye. Pine Ridge Veterinary Center, date of service, April 8th. Patient, Scout balance, due, $163.22. Margaret froze. April 8th, 3 days after she went in for surgery. 3 days when she lay in a hospital bed with wires taped to her chest and bruises blooming on her arms from failed IV lines. Her hand trembled as she unfolded the bill completely. Procedure: medical evaluation, senior canine. Status: owner surrender. Decline in owner's health cited as reason authorized by Amanda Carver Wilson. Notes: owner is no longer capable of consistent care. Surrender is in pet's best interest. It was all there. Not just the lie, the rewriting. Amanda hadn't just given Scout away, she'd drafted a case for why it had to happen. And she'd done it under Margaret's name. The bill remained unpaid. Margaret rubbed the corners of her eyes. The fluorescent kitchen light flickered slightly above her, the quiet hum of the refrigerator now sounding like static. Scout's last recorded vet visit had been framed like a mercy, but it wasn't mercy, it was erasure. She moved to the drawer by the fridge where they kept pens, receipts, and old birthday cards. At the bottom, beneath expired coupons and a user manual for the blender Amanda never cleaned, she found what she was looking for: her old black checkbook. She hadn't used it in years. Everything was digital now, but some things required ink, required intention. She flipped to the last used page, tore out a new check, and filled it out. Pay to the order of Pine Ridge Veterinary Center memo. Final payment. Scout. She slipped the bill and the check into a clean envelope and sealed it with a hard press of her thumb. Then she opened her phone's camera and snapped a photo of the statement. The image showed Scout's name, the date, and Amanda's signature as authorized party. She opened her email, to herself, subject, household breach attachment, vetbill48.jpg. She clicked send, then she opened her notes app and added a new bullet point under documented violations. April 8th. Unauthorized vet visit billed to me. Falsely claimed medical incapacity. No consent. She pushed the phone away and stood. In the hallway, the door to the spare room creaked. Amanda's voice followed, light and careless. "I'm putting on tea." "Want some?" Margaret answered without turning. "No." "You sure?" "Ginger turmeric. Helps with inflammation." "I'm not inflamed," Margaret said. "Just aware." Amanda didn't reply. Footsteps moved back toward the kitchen. Margaret stood still, listening to the kettle begin to heat, the familiar whistle beginning its slow rise like a siren in the distance. She returned to her room and pulled open her closet door. On the top shelf, behind a box of holiday decorations, sat a small fireproof case. She opened it and placed the vet bill copy inside, alongside the house deed, mortgage clause, and the printed receipts. One more log on the fire. Quiet, controlled, but building. She clicked the case shut, then whispered to herself, "Next time she rewrites my story, she'll be the one paying for it." He wagged his tail. I nearly wept. The yard was deep and green, bordered by rose bushes and a white picket fence too clean to be real. A bird feeder swung lazily from a maple tree, the wind teasing chimes into gentle conversation. Margaret stood on the sidewalk just past the driveway, hands buried deep in her coat pockets. Her heart beat faster than it had in weeks, not with panic but with something rarer, hope laced with fear. She'd gotten the call 2 days after sending her letter. "Hi, this is Lila," the woman on the line had said. "We adopted a dog named Scout last week. We got your letter and we'd love to talk." And now here she was, facing the wooden gate. The door to the house opened, and a woman in her early 60s stepped out wearing jeans, sneakers, and a kindness that didn't feel rehearsed. "Mrs. Wilson?" Margaret nodded, her throat too tight to reply. Lila opened the gate slowly and gestured her in. "He's in the yard." Margaret stepped through. She wasn't sure what to expect. Indifference, confusion, maybe a tail wag and nothing more. But the moment Scout saw her, his body froze for a heartbeat, then exploded into motion. He bounded across the grass, his limbs still a little stiff with age but moving as if nothing else mattered. His bark cut through the spring air, joyful, unrestrained, the sound of recognition. Margaret dropped to one knee just in time for him to barrel into her. His fur was just as coarse as she remembered, his breath warm with chicken and kibble. He licked her chin, her cheek, her face, whimpering with each press as if trying to say, "Where have you been?" She buried her face into the curve of his neck. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "You're okay?" Her knees ached against the ground, but she didn't move. Not yet. Lila watched quietly from the porch. "He recognized your scent the moment the letter came. He sniffed it, wagged his tail, and sat by the door." Margaret looked up, brushing at her eyes. "You've taken good care of him." "We try. He's part of the family now. We didn't know how he came to us. Not really." "You do now," Margaret said, her voice still low. "Amanda didn't tell me she gave him up. She didn't tell anyone. I came home from surgery and he was just gone." Lila stepped closer. "I can't imagine." Margaret stood slowly, Scout sitting faithfully at her side. "I'm not here to uproot him. If he's happy, he should stay. But I needed to see for myself." "We'd like to propose something," Lila said, glancing back toward the house. "My husband and I talked after your letter. If it's something you're open to, we'd like to make you his co-owner. That way, if anything ever changes, if something happens to us, he goes straight back to you. No shelter, no guessing." Margaret blinked, stunned by the generosity. "You'd really do that? He's bonded to you. We're just borrowing the joy." Inside, Lila retrieved a single-page guardianship form, already filled with Scout's microchip number and Lila's contact info. A blank line waited at the bottom. Margaret read every word carefully, then signed. Margaret L. Wilson. Co-owner Scout sat at her feet as she did, head pressed to her shin. Lila handed her a copy. "We'll keep you updated. You can visit whenever you like." "I'd like that," Margaret said. She didn't say how much. As she turned to leave, Scout followed her to the gate. "Go on," she whispered. "This is your yard now." He didn't bark, just looked up at her, tail swishing like a pendulum of promise. Back in her car, Margaret folded the guardianship form into her purse. Before starting the engine, she opened her phone and added a final note to her household breach folder. "Scout is safe, now secure the rest. She never asked to live here, so I didn't ask before listing it." The knock on the lawyer's office door was subtle, as if even Margaret didn't want to disturb the quiet she was about to legally upend. Elaine Harrow was efficient, measured, and too intelligent to ask questions she already knew the answers to. She greeted Margaret with a nod and pushed a stack of clean white papers across the desk. "I reviewed everything you emailed," Elaine said, her glasses glinting slightly in the afternoon light. "The financial transactions, the vet bill, the grocery, misuse, and the household occupancy history." She tapped the stack. "Here's your lease." Margaret ran her hand over the paper, crisp, precise. A single sheet that put a price tag on what Amanda had taken for granted for 3 years. "Monthly rent set to match current market value," Elaine continued. "It's generous considering the size of the guest room and full home access. The clause at the bottom allows them the option to vacate instead of signing." "And if they refuse both?" Margaret asked. Elaine reached into a side drawer and slid out another envelope. "Then you serve this." Margaret opened it. The words were sterile, cold in a necessary way. "Notice of termination of gratis occupancy, effective immediately, non-binding informal cohabitation ended." "I've represented enough older clients to tell you this isn't petty," Elaine said, voice softening. "This is protection." Margaret nodded. "She never asked to live here, so I didn't ask before listing it." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "You listed it?" "Quietly," Margaret said. "Private platform, short-term rentals only. First available date, 30 days from today." Elaine let out a quiet breath. "You're more prepared than most." "I'm a librarian," Margaret replied. "Preparation was my job." She tucked both the lease and the termination letter into a slim blue folder labeled Domestic Administrative Actions, Private. Later that evening, back home, she made herself a fresh cup of mint tea, real mint from the leaves Scout used to roll in, and walked the folder to her room. Amanda's voice echoed in the kitchen, something about meal prepping and how expensive salmon had gotten. Chris added a non-committal grunt. Margaret didn't pause. She shut her bedroom door with care, locked it for the first time in years, and placed the folder on her nightstand. She opened her laptop and logged into the listing site. Listing title: Charming Private Guest Room. Safe, quiet, centrally located monthly rate, $1,250. Status: pending availability. She scrolled to the calendar and marked one square in bold, available May 15th. Her finger hovered over the listing before clicking Save Changes. Down the hall, she heard the washing machine beep and Amanda call out, "Did someone move my laundry?" Margaret sipped her tea and smiled without answer. Before bed, she printed 2 copies of the lease, tucked one into Amanda's mail cubby by the stairs, and left the other on the kitchen counter beneath a post-it note. "Please read. Questions welcome. Deadline included." She didn't need a confrontation. She only needed clarity. In the morning, she planned to deliver the notice to Elaine for filing. Quiet, clean, legal. Amanda and Chris would have 30 days to choose: become tenants or become memories. Margaret sat at the edge of her bed and opened her planner. She circled one date and wrote beside it in neat black ink, "New guest arrives." She said, "I thought we were family." I said, "So was Scout." Margaret set the table like she always did, carefully, quietly, deliberately. Forks aligned, water glasses filled to the same level, cloth napkins folded in soft triangles, pressed flat like secrets. She placed the roast chicken in the center, surrounded by roasted root vegetables. It smelled right: garlic, rosemary, a little too much pepper, but the warmth didn't reach the room. Not tonight. The notice sat beneath Amanda's plate, folded neatly in a blank envelope. The lease, unsigned, rested under Chris's. They didn't notice right away. Amanda breezed in first, wearing yoga pants and a new mauve sweatshirt that Margaret didn't recognize. Her hair was damp from a shower, and her voice had the same performative brightness it always did when she wanted to sound generous. "You made dinner?" she said, surprised, but not grateful. "That's so sweet of you, Margaret." Chris followed, phone in hand, thumb still scrolling as he took his seat. "Smells good." Margaret poured her own glass of water, then sat. No one spoke for the first few bites. The chicken was tender, the vegetables were soft, but the silence around the table was harder than bone. Amanda reached for the salt. "So, did you see the note I left about the juicer? It's leaking again. I was going to look into a new one." "I saw it," Margaret said, "but I didn't read it." Amanda blinked. "Oh, okay." Chris shifted in his seat. "Everything all right, Mom?" Margaret cut a piece of potato. "It's fine. I just figured I'd wait to see your reactions first." "Reactions to what?" Amanda asked. Margaret gestured to the envelopes. "Go ahead." They exchanged glances. Amanda opened hers first. Her smile thinned as her eyes flicked down the page. Chris unfolded his next. "Is this a lease?" he asked slowly. "Yes," Margaret said. "And also a notice. You can either sign the lease or vacate the property in 30 days. Amanda laughed, but it was hollow. "You're joking." "I'm not." "You can't just kick us out," Chris said. "I'm not kicking you out," Margaret replied. "I'm asking you to become accountable. If you want to live here, you'll pay for it. If not, I'll make space for someone who will." Amanda's face flushed. "We're family." Margaret's voice was calm, but her words were glass. So was Scout. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was suffocating. Chris looked from one woman to the other, lost. "Can't we just talk about this like—" "We are talking," Margaret said. "This is the most honest conversation we've had in 3 years." Amanda slammed her napkin down. "I gave up so much to take care of you. You bought vitamins with my money and called it love." Chris raised his hands. "All right, enough. This is all getting out of hand." Margaret's eyes locked on his. "You said 2 months, Chris. That was 981 days ago." Amanda stood. "I did what was best." Margaret stood too, but didn't raise her voice. "So did I." Amanda grabbed her plate, left the food untouched, and stormed down the hallway. A door slammed. Chris lingered, unsure, uncomfortable. "You really think this is how Dad would have wanted things handled?" Margaret didn't flinch. "He'd have wanted Scout here when I came home from surgery." Chris had no reply. Margaret sat again, alone now, on one side of the table. The steam from the chicken had cooled. The herbs smelled sharper in the cold. He stood to follow Amanda but paused at the doorway. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked. Margaret didn't answer. A moment later, the front door creaked open. Amanda stepped out in a flurry, keys jangling, coat half on. Margaret followed. When Amanda turned to re-enter, Margaret met her gaze, then slowly, without malice, closed the door. And locked it. "They made space in my home. I reclaimed it." The front door creaked open at 8:42 a.m., and for once, Margaret wasn't there to greet it. Instead, a crew of 3 stepped inside, lugging buckets, gloves, drop cloths, and a roll of masking tape the size of a saucer. A cheerful woman with a clipboard glanced around the entryway, then smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson. You ready for the reset?" Margaret closed her planner. "I've been ready for 3 years." The cleaning team started upstairs while she stood by the dining room window, watching the driveway remain stubbornly empty. Amanda and Chris were gone, half gone anyway. Their voices had quieted days ago, retreating into thin, passive comments and sharp silences. After the lease confrontation, they didn't bring it up again. But Margaret didn't need their words. She had her calendar. May 15th, move-out day. Now, with 1 week left, she'd hired the best-reviewed cleaning crew in town and scheduled the painters for the following Thursday. A neutral, warm white, she'd decided. Light but confident. Something that wouldn't apologize for the walls it covered. Down the hall, the spare bedroom door creaked open. She followed the sound, leaning slightly on her cane as she stepped into what used to be her guest space. Amanda's touches were still here. Vision boards with curling edges, a wire jewelry rack with tangled necklaces, a yoga mat rolled into the corner like a silent witness. Margaret took it all in with a practiced eye, not as a grieving host, but as a woman ready to reclaim square footage. She opened the closet. Half empty. A suitcase sat waiting, lid unzipped, like even Amanda knew the exit was overdue. By noon, the cleaning crew had stripped the beds, vacuumed beneath the dresser, and removed a ring of mold from under the bathroom sink that Margaret hadn't known was there. "This room's got good bones," the lead cleaner said as she wiped down the windows. "Feels like it's meant to turn over." Margaret smiled. "It is." She'd already updated the listing. Available May 18th, private entrance, quiet home, respect required. A polite, subtle warning. Freeloaders need not apply. She spent the afternoon at her desk, writing a welcome note for the new guest, someone named Dana, a traveling oncology nurse on a short-term assignment. Dana had messaged promptly, politely, and signed her name with warmth. Already, she felt more like a tenant than Amanda ever had. As the sun dipped low, casting long gold shadows across the kitchen tiles, Margaret made herself a single cup of tea. She opened her laptop one last time and double-checked the renter agreement. Security deposit confirmed. Keys ready in a lockbox. She stood, stretched her shoulders, and walked to the spare room one more time. Amanda had taken most of her things out that morning. A few items remained on the dresser, a half-used essential oil, a ceramic dish with loose change, and an open magazine folded to an article titled, "Toxic People When Distance is the Only Option." Margaret laughed under her breath. Not bitter, just accurate. A ping echoed from her phone. She picked it up and opened Instagram. Amanda's latest story, still warm with the timestamp, a selfie from the driver's seat of her car, lips slightly pursed in pout. Text overlay in white. Some people can't be helped. Some. E times peace means letting go. Margaret stared at the screen for a long moment, then tapped her finger and muted Amanda's profile, forever. She walked outside to the garden, where the air was cool and Scout's collar still hung from the wind chime. Then, without hesitation, she pulled out her phone again and typed into her calendar. Dana arrives. Fresh start begins. They left his collar in the trash. I kept the name tag. The bag was half-zipped, half-heartedly tossed beside the garage door, one of the last Amanda left behind. Margaret hadn't planned on looking through it. She'd meant to toss it out with the others, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the weight of it. Maybe it was instinct. She knelt, unzipped the bag, and pulled back a pair of mismatched gym shoes. Beneath them, a tangled charger cord, an expired lip balm, and a half-used shampoo bottle rolled loosely in the corners. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and resentment. Then she saw it. The blue nylon collar, curled in on itself, frayed at the edges. Scout's collar. It had no business being here. No dignity deserved to end in a garbage bag. Margaret pulled it out slowly, the name tag clinking faintly against the plastic buckle. She turned it over in her hand. The silver disc still bore the engraving, SCOUT if found, call M. Wilson. Her breath hitched. She hadn't seen it since the day she went into surgery, since before Amanda rewrote the family's loyalty with a pen and a forged surrender slip. She stood, brought the collar inside, and sat at the dining table where she'd once laid out contracts and betrayal like dinner. Now there was only sunlight through the kitchen window and the soft, distant sound of a sparrow at the feeder. She pulled out her keys and examined the ring, house key, mailbox key, and one silver charm her late husband had given her on their 20th anniversary. She slid the tag between them carefully, pressing the tiny split ring open with her thumb, threading Scout's name into place. The collar itself she folded neatly, wrapped in tissue, and placed inside her fireproof box, next to the guardianship form and the lease agreement, a record of what had been taken, and what had been returned. Later that afternoon, she walked through the freshly painted hallway. The air still held the clean scent of primer, wood, and lemon polish. The guest room looked brand new bedding, new curtains, new rules. The closet stood empty, doors open like arms. On the nightstand, a vase of marigolds. Bright, simple, bold. Her phone buzzed. Dana. Just parked. Is now still okay? Margaret smiled. Margaret. Front door's open. Come on in. She walked to the foyer and picked up the envelope labeled Welcome. Inside, the house key, Wi-Fi password, emergency contacts, and a handwritten note that ended with P.S. No pets allowed, but one dog spirit might greet you anyway. Don't be alarmed if the wind chimes ring harder than they should. A knock sounded, gentle, 2 taps and a pause. Margaret opened the door. Dana stood there, shoulder-length braids, a duffel bag in one hand, and an energy that was equal parts peace and purpose. Hi, she said. I hope I'm not too early. Right on time, Margaret replied, stepping aside. As Dana entered, her eyes roamed the space with practiced curiosity. It smells like someone cares in here, Margaret chuckled. That's intentional. She handed Dana the envelope. Their hands touched for a moment, warm, steady. If you need anything, I'm down the hall. If you need nothing, that's fine too. Dana smiled, tucking the envelope under her arm. I'm usually quiet. I read, I rest, I cook. Occasionally cry over dog videos. You'll fit right in. Margaret watched her head toward the guest room, a space that had held too much and now finally felt like possibility. She stepped outside for a moment. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the porch. The wind picked up slightly, nudging the chimes. Scout's name tag clinked against her keys in rhythm. Margaret closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and whispered, "Let's start again, shall we?" This time the guest paid, and brought flowers. The lilies arrived on a Wednesday. A modest bouquet, yellow and white, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a single piece of twine. No vase, no card, just a knock at the door and Dana's voice saying, "These are for you." A thank you, and a just because. Margaret stood in the doorway in her house slippers, momentarily stunned. "You didn't have to do that." Dana smiled and handed them over. "Which is exactly why I wanted to." The flowers weren't expensive, but they were intentional. And in this house, where taking had become habit, they were proof that something had changed. Margaret placed them in her grandmother's old vase, set them on the kitchen counter, and took a step back to admire the quiet brightness they brought. A small thing, but after years of being made to feel like an accessory in her own home, small things carry weight. She walked through the hallway, sunlight streaming in through clean windows, no sounds of stomping shoes, no murmured complaints about organic groceries or expired almond milk, just birdsong outside and the scent of lemon oil in the floorboards. The guest room door was ajar. Inside, Dana had made the bed perfectly, a book of poetry on the nightstand and her suitcase tucked neatly out of sight. She'd only been there a week, but already it felt like she fit. That afternoon, Margaret sat in the garden with Scout. The new family had brought him for his weekly visit, just as they'd promised. He bounded up the steps with a joy that made her breath catch every time. Now he lay beside her, head on her sandal, eyes closed in sun-soaked bliss. "Still your yard, huh?" she whispered, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. He responded with a low, contented groan, the sound of peace reclaimed. The gate creaked slightly as the wind picked up, and Margaret leaned back, feeling it ripple through the loose fabric of her blouse. The chimes danced above her, Scout's tag now part of the melody. She checked her banking app. The retirement account was untouched. The new one, locked and secure, showed a quiet string of deposits from Dana's monthly rent, not much, but more than financial. It was respect, finally returned to form. That evening, as Dana made herself tea in the kitchen and Margaret settled onto the couch with a crossword, her phone vibrated on the end table. She glanced at the screen. "Chris, hey, Amanda and I were wondering if we could talk sometime, not about the house, just talk." Margaret stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. The room was warm, not just from the sunset filtering through the blinds, but from the absence of tension, from the clear air, from a space no longer filled with pretend gratitude or whispered resentment. She read the message again, not about the house. That was almost worse. She turned off the screen and let it sit. In the background, Dana's kettle whistled softly. The smell of cinnamon and chamomile drifted toward the living room. Margaret rose and stepped into the hall. Dana was pouring hot water into a mug shaped like a sun. She looked up. "Want some?" she asked. Margaret nodded. "Yes, I think I do." As Dana handed her the mug, she added, "Your house feels like somewhere people come to rest." Margaret smiled, lifting the tea. It wasn't always. She returned to her chair, set the mug beside her, then picked up the phone again. The message still waited, unread. She typed a reply, paused, deleted it, then typed something else. Short, deliberate. "You can come by Sunday. Dana will be here, just so you know. They gave away my dog. I gave away the free ride." The grass was dewy beneath Margaret's feet, and the sky hung low in that soft pastel way only spring could manage, half blush, half promise. Scout's paws left light impressions in the soil as he bounded ahead, nose twitching, tail high. It was morning, early, quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Margaret walked slowly, letting her cane drag slightly behind her on the stepping stones, as if she didn't want the walk to end too soon. Her other hand held the leash gently, though Scout didn't tug. He didn't need to. He stayed close now, as if he knew this yard had been wrestled back for both of them. The flower beds she'd once let fall into disrepair were now neat again. Some perennials, a patch of lavender, a stubborn little rosebush that had finally bloomed after years of refusing. Like her, slow to return, but impossible to keep down. The back gate creaked as she opened it, and Scout moved forward with soft urgency. His nose pressed against the grass, then the tree he used to mark every morning. He looked over his shoulder and wagged once. "Still yours," Margaret said, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "But you're sharing it now." She glanced up at the second-story window where Dana had hung a stained-glass sun catcher. It spun in the breeze, scattering prisms across the house siding, dancing on the walls of a space that had finally learned boundaries. Margaret took a breath. The air was fresh, not just with the scent of earth and early flowers, but with stillness. There was no tension pressing in from behind closed doors, no quiet conversations with words unsaid, no eggshells underfoot, just the garden, just Scout, just her. She sat down on the bench under the willow tree, her husband's old bench, the one he'd sanded and restained one summer when they still shared mornings like this. Scout curled beside her, resting his head on her knee with a huff. She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out her phone, scrolled briefly, stopped at the name, Amanda Carver Wilson. The photo icon was still that over-filtered beach shot Amanda had used for everything: waves, sunglasses, perfect angles. Margaret stared at it a moment, then pressed Edit Contact. She didn't hesitate. Delete contact? Yes. The name disappeared, leaving only space where it used to be. Her thumb hovered a moment longer. Then she opened her photo album, scrolled past receipts, documents, screenshots, found the old photo of Scout. The one on the porch, head tilted, eyes warm, name tag shining. She set it as her lock screen. Scout shifted, pressing closer. Margaret laughed gently. "You know," she murmured, stroking his fur, "they gave you away like you were something broken." He blinked up at her, content. "But you weren't, and neither was I." A light breeze stirred the chimes hanging from the porch, Scout's old collar ringing gently between brass tubes. She watched it sway, a rhythm like a memory returning home. From inside the house came the low sound of Dana's morning playlist, soft jazz, something with a saxophone, slow and unintrusive. The clink of a spoon against ceramic followed, then quiet again. A good guest. A real one. Scout stood and nosed at Margaret's palm, asking with his eyes what came next. "Let's do one more loop," she said, rising, "then breakfast. For both of us." She walked slowly, deliberately, her spine straighter than it had been in years. They reached the garden path again. Sunlight cut between the branches and painted gold across the top of her silver hair. "Home means something again," she said aloud, just for him. "Doesn't it?" Scout barked once. Quiet, sure. "They removed what I loved. I removed what I tolerated.